century-long romance with the automobile, the passion has never burned brighter than with hot rods. Be they immaculate show cars, gritty racers, or somewhere in between, hot rods embody the core values that made this country great. Innovation, competition, improvisation, good looks, fast cars, and the relentless drive to succeed. As told by the legends, old and new, who lived it. This is the incredible true story of an American icon, the hot rod. Hello, I'm Chip Foose. In the annals of American motoring, no car has ever captured the public's imagination quite like hot rods. In this series, American Icon, the Hot Rod, we'll explore the history of these beloved cars, from their origins on the dry lakes of Southern California to hot rodding in the 21st century. We'll also meet the extraordinary racers, designers, and builders who made the cars possible. Hot rod culture is one of the most vibrant and distinctive in American history. Born of the first youth culture the world had ever seen, hot rodders were the original bad boys, and that outlaw image persists to this day. A reputation well earned, as early hot rodders took to the streets of Southern California in search of the ultimate high, wide open, top speed. Hot rodders look like outlaws. They slick their hair back, they've got prominent tattoos, and devil-may-care attitudes. Their cars are flashy, fast, and most of all, loud. This outlaw image was a byproduct of a young generation attempting to carve out its own identity. The best way to do so was rebellion.
There was an outlaw rebel, smarter somehow than Detroit. They weren't what your father drove. They weren't what the fat kids drove. They were in their father's Oldsmobiles and their mother's Cadillacs. The hot rod was a little bit of an outlaw car. You know, it had a mean, purposeful look about it. You knew it when you saw it, and you heard it when you saw it.
My parents hated hot rodding, hated cars, thought it was the biggest waste of time. You're going nowhere, you hang out with the hot rodders.
The intended result of this rebellion against authority was that most elusive of qualities, coolness.
As soon as there were two cars in the road, there was a race. And as soon as there were two cars in the road, one was trying to be cooler than the other, so there was customizing and hot rodding. It just started from the very beginning.
It comes back to that whole outlaw thing again. You know, you want to be a little bit separated from the herd and a little bit outside the law because it's kind of fun.
Hot rodding became not just an image, but a way of life.
This isn't my job. This is my existence. This is my entire being. I definitely feel like I live kind of this counterculture lifestyle.
And it wasn't long before this image percolated out to all corners of society. And in the process, it became something distinctly American.
The hot rod evolved out of America. There's an essence to it that's very, very hard to put into words.
You know, hot rodding is about American ingenuity at its best. I mean, Wally used to use the phrase, a lot of go for little dough.
There's so many aspects of our culture that hot rodding has influenced. It's influenced art, it's influenced fashion, it's influenced the way we date, it influenced the way we decorate our bodies, for example, tattoos and piercings and things like that.
I think, Hollywood is as responsible for setting up that bad boy image as anybody does. Unfortunately, I think in many ways Hollywood doesn't get it because they always portray them as bad people, but we like that part of it. You know, we don't want to be the good guy. We want to be the badass racer.
How many times have I told you to stay out of those hot rods?
It's not a hot rod.
And I warned him about that girl, too. She's wild.
But before the movies, before the drive-ins, before the culture, before the cool, there was the Model T, the very foundation of the hot rod. From 1908 to 1927, Ford built 16 million Model Ts, and American car culture was born. Model T bodies were later put to three very different uses: as Lakes Roadsters, as distinctive and often unbeatable dragsters, and as wildly innovative customs. A small speed equipment industry also sprung up to improve on the Model T's four-cylinder engine.
The guy with the second Model T in town pulled up next to the guy with the first Model T in town, and the race was on.
In 1928, the Model T gave way to the Model A, created as a reaction to General Motors encroaching on Ford's market share. The Model A was bigger, better built, faster, and more rugged than the T, and its improved design had a major influence on early hot rodders. One of those early hot rodders was Alex Exidius, the founder of SoCal Speed Shop and one of the true legends of the culture.
They call them AV8s before the war, and that was the original hot rod to me. That was a hot rod because you did something different. You put a V8 engine in a Model A, and that took some conversion, it took some engineering, it took some thought.
One of the cool things was to take a 29 or a 30 body and put it on a 32 chassis. One of the very first kind of hot rod iconic looks. That was really very popular.
The seminal moment came in 1932 when Ford introduced the Model B and then the V8. Now known as the Deuce, it set the bar for styling and refinement in mass-produced cars.
The 32 just looked right. It looked like the Lincoln. It looked like the Duesenberg. It was just a great styling exercise. It just took the Model A and did everything cool to the Model A and turned it into the 32. So the guys got it.
I think what's special about a 32 Ford, I mean, for me and the people that came before me and after, is that it was like this perfect platform. You could customize it, you could hot rod it, you could race it.
But the 32 Ford had a style. No matter what body style, whether it was a four-door sedan or a roadster, it just seemed to adapt itself. It just, you lowered it a little bit and changed the wheels, and you had a great-looking car without a lot of effort. That's why it has become so popular.
Ford sold nearly 300,000 V8s in 13 body styles. However, the real revolution was under the hood, as the four-cylinder engine that had been a staple of Ford since the Model T gave way to a new 221 cubic inch, 65 horsepower flathead V8.
Here was a V8 that had just been in like the most expensive luxury cars at the time. Here's Henry Ford making this V8 for everybody. So it was inexpensive, it was smooth. The 32 Ford was a simple choice for anybody.
Well, when Chevrolet came out with its six-cylinder engine in 1929, Ford looked at it and said, wait a minute, my next engine's not going to be six-cylinder, it's going to be eight. We're going to outdo Chevy, and he did it. In 1932, he introduced the first low-priced V8 in an automobile.
The main thing that it did was it was fast. People want to go fast. There it was, a V8 engine in a sedan that you could go buy for X amount of dollars and throw the body and the fenders away and put a 29 Roadster on it, and you were ready to go racing.
And it didn't catch on right away, especially in hot rodding. It was probably not until the late 30s that it became popular, because the four-banger stuff had been developed to such a point that they could beat the stock V8s. Until people like Edelbrock started putting a manifold on and maybe the cylinder heads. And then the flathead was the basis of hot rodding.
The early speed equipment industry was slow to catch on to the V8, primarily because most speed equipment at that time was built by hobbyists in their garages. And what industry there was still geared toward the four-cylinder.
Pre-war hot rodding was kind of just, you faked it the best you could because you couldn't afford to buy anything, and there really weren't many things being made. There were a few dual manifolds around, There were no high compression heads with fins and stuff like that. You could get Denver heads, which were high altitude heads. They were made for Ford products in the Rocky Mountains, so they had a little more compression. So that was a speed secret. A Denver head looked just like the other heads. Well, the other thing you could do is take the fan off, which would let you accelerate quicker. Maybe get some dual pipes. That was a big deal because the dual pipe mufflers in those days really sounded good. They had a rumble to them, and it sounded like you doubled the horsepower. I mean, it sounded powerful.
This evolution in performance enhancement took place against the backdrop of the culmination of the American dream, Los Angeles. Los Angeles in the 1930s was a boomtown with a tenfold expansion in population since the turn of the century. With the residential boom came a concerted road building program, and soon Los Angeles had more paved roads than almost any other city in the nation. Those paved roads were immediately the setting for hundreds of illegal street races.
In those days, we were drag racing from signal to signal on Sunset Boulevard. I mean, that was pretty much racing for the average kid.
Racing on the street was great, and we'd always meet at certain drive-ins, in the evening, and about drag racing after that. Different groups raced in different areas. We raced on North Sepulveda because there wasn't any cars to speak of. There was no freeways. You race until you hear a siren coming and then you beat it.
But Los Angeles had more to offer than just abundant blacktop. In fact, climate and geography conspired to create the ideal setting for the growth of the hot rod movement.
California seems always to have been a hotbed of hot rodding. What you have is a convergence of circumstances like no other anywhere else in the world. You've got a geography that lends itself to it. You've got mountains, you've got the beach, you've got the deserts that draw people to the area to begin with.
Growing up in California puts us light years ahead of everybody else, and I don't mean that derogatorily. I mean, when you got a place where you can literally drive an unfendered car 330 days out of the year, it's a big advantage.
And it's not raining, it's not snowy, so now you can do it every day of the week. And you had sunshine, and you had beaches, and you had girls, and, Balboa Island to go to. I mean, I wasn't here, so, to me, it's just an incredible dream. It's like, let's go to paradise, and when you get here, it is. From a car person's point of view, Southern California is paradise.
Hot rodding didn't develop around the rest of the country, although the guys were interested in cars. They just didn't have the place to run them. We had this incredible, dry, hard, flat surface that we could go for miles.
The Dry Lakes, located in the high desert of the Antelope Valley, 100 miles from downtown Los Angeles, were dried mud flats created by the natural drainage of the desert. The largest and best for racing was Muroc, 44 square miles of relatively smooth driving.
We initially had Muroc until the Air Force took it over, and then we had El Mirage and Harper and some other dry lakes. The real motivation of running the lakes was just to try to make your car go as fast as it would go, and then maybe you'd go home and change something and hope it would go a mile an hour faster the next lake. Be the fastest hot rod. That was the goal. It was something you could do just for the fun of it. Now, other people saw it more than that. Guys like Vic Edelbrock and Bob Rufai, they really knew what they were doing and went pretty darn fast for the equipment they had. There were a lot of guys up there that just took the fenders off their roadsters and went up and raced. They took the windshields off and the lights and ran through the traps. But there weren't that many before the war. They were mostly guys that knew what they were doing. We'd go up and watch them, of course. It was really neat to see those guys.
For the war, Bob Rufai, one of the first streamline cars. Red Schlemmer, I had great early cars. And Barney Navarro. Phil Remington, one of the greatest fabricators in our industry. Those guys had so much talent, and they didn't go to school to learn any of that stuff because there was no way you could go to learn it. They did it just by osmosis. They just sucked that ingenuity out of those cars and learned how to make them go fast. And it gives me goosebumps to think about it, and guys doing that.
the Dry Lakes launched the careers of a number of men who would go on to find fame and fortune in the car world. Aftermarket pioneers like Vic Edelbrock Sr., Stu Hilborn, and Ed Escuderian got their first taste of speed on the Dry Lakes, as did the amazing Phil Remington, who would later find renown as a key part of Carroll Shelby's Cobra program.
I think about 1939 I got a 34 Ford convertible, and I started working on that, hopping it up a little bit. The first time I actually ran at Muroc was 1940. I had this 34 convertible, and I had a different camshaft in it. Took a little cut off the heads on a little bigger carburetor. Took the fenders off, and I think I ran 110 miles an hour, which was not much more than idling these days. So we had this club in Santa Monica called the Blowflyers, and to join the club you had to be able to run 90 miles an hour, which at that time wasn't very hard to do.
You had to be a member of a club to run at the lakes. If not, you could apply as a guest of one of the clubs. If you broke a record or if you came in the fastest in your class, there were a certain number of points, and at the end of the year they would have the point standings by the clubs, as well as by individual cars. You have an awards banquet and give the trophies for the most prominent clubs, the most prominent individuals.
Even before the war, the lake scene was savagely Darwinian. Adapt or get left in the dust, sometimes quite literally.
Cars would race 4, 5, 6 across the lake bed, and that was fine if you were in the lead, but if you weren't, it was just dust and couldn't see where you were going and not necessarily knowing what direction you were taking. There was not a lot of organization.
We needed some kind of a group. We needed safety rules. People were running into each other up there, and they were running in different directions, and there would be different timers setting up their own courses, independent guys with timers. It wasn't working out, and there were enough clubs in the area to form an organization.
There was a whole bunch of clubs racing, like the Throttlers and the Gophers and the Sidewinders. In 1937, these clubs got together and formed the Southern California Timing Association. And that is still, one of the oldest motor racing sanctioning bodies in the world. They still run 5 or 6 races at El Mirage a year, and with the BNI, run the Bonneville Nationals.
The Southern California Timing Association brought order to the anarchy of pre-war Dry Lakes racing. With their jaunty pith helmets and primitive timing stands, the members of the SCTA had 2 goals: safety and standardization. At the forefront was a man who would become one of hot rodding's most revered figures, Wally Parks.
Wally Parks was the man behind a lot of it. He was trying to get SCTA and this Dry Lakes racing or straightaway racing organized. Before that, there weren't any really rules or anything.
Wally Parks started racing at Muroc Dry Lake in 1933, and by 1938, he was the editor of the SCTA's monthly newsletter. He's also often credited with coining the term drag race. His involvement with the SCTA kicked off a decades-long quest to legitimize hot rods and provide drivers with racing venues away from public roads.
Wally was one of my heroes. I love the man, and he did so much for our sport, and that goes kind of unnoticed. But he was racing back in 1932, 1933. He was one of the founders of the SCTA in 1937, and just was driven by this whole thing. And really, somebody, Wally said, "How are you feeling?" And the guy goes, "I'm tired." And Wally goes, "I've been tired all my life." And you just know that the guy worked 24 hours a day.
Dry Lakes racing was thriving, with the SCTA mandating increased safety requirements and individual racers coming up with new and innovative speed equipment. Lakes racing was coming of age. But then came the day that would doom the Dry Lakes scene to 4 long years of darkness and dormancy.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked.
During World War II, fuel and tires were rationed, Ford factories were retooled to create the arsenal of democracy, and many lakes racers were sent overseas to fight the Axis. But even half a world away from Southern California, soldiers were spreading the hot rod gospel.
There was a lot of mail sent to them overseas, describing what was going on with the younger guys. I think they all wanted to get home and get involved in it. A lot of them did.
And I know that during the war, I had a picture of my 34 Cabriolet, and I showed it to everybody, and every hot rodder did that same thing. Every hot rodder had a picture of his hot rod, and he'd show it to somebody from, Akron, and they'd all go, wow, because here's a car without fenders, which you couldn't do back in Akron, of course, with the snow and everything.
On August 14th, 1945, Japan surrendered, and World War II was over. The demobilization of the largest army in American history began, and soldiers started returning home to their families and their cars.
Millions of us got out of the service within 6 months of each other, and hundreds of thousands of them were in Southern California, and they could hardly wait to get back to their cars, and the ones that didn't have cars when they went in bought a Roadster. And that was one of the reasons I started SoCal Speed Shop. You could see that there was going to be this incredible desire for speed and cars and liberty and stuff that you didn't have all those years in the service.
Hot rods were just starting to get popular, and SCTA was just getting a good foot on things and bloomed.
The golden age of hot rodding had begun. By the tens of thousands, people took to the streets and the dry lakes, spawning a culture, an industry, an entire way of life. Nothing would be the same. The men who raced on the dry lakes before World War II may not have known it at the time, but they were pioneers. They laid the foundation of what would become a singularly American pursuit. And hot rod culture in the late 1940s would undergo such explosive growth that it would eventually outgrow its ancestral home on the dry lake beds of Southern California. But that's another story for another time. Until then, I'm Chip Foose. Thanks for watching. Next time on American Icon, the Hot Rod.
It was just a zoo for a long time at the lakes.
The wheel came off, and I was airborne. Not just up, I went end over end over end. One of the doctors said, we got some bad news. You've got a broken back. When I held on and got scared so tight that my fingers would not release the steering wheel. And that's